Hey, what's up everybody? David Wood here for DavidWoodFX.blogspot.com to bring you another Gimp tutorial. And in today's tutorial we will be creating an effect similar to that seen by Jinx in Teen Titans. It is also kind of something kind of like a magical energy wave effect. Let's take a look at that right now. This is what it's going to look like when we're done. As you can see, it's got this very goofy, crazy effect to it. And it's got this little wave warping going on in the background here, and a nice overall glow effect. And in the show, she uses it, and it kind of causes other characters problems when she uses her powers against them. So let's jump right into that tutorial. Bring in your image. Now I'm using an image that I found on DeviantArt, and that is this image right here, Medieval Reaching Masked 1, which I'll have a link for in the description. But just open whatever image you're using in Gimp, and first thing we'll do is we'll duplicate this layer. And on the second one, we'll right click and choose Add Layer Mask. We want this to set it on black as full transparency. Hit Add. And so that way, anything that we draw on the layer mask in white will become visible, like so. And we'll come back to that later. But for now, we'll create another new layer. Doesn't matter what color we fill it with. And we'll go to Filters, Render Clouds, Solid Noise. And in the solid noise settings, we want to increase the detail to 15. And turn on the turbulent checkbox, and also check on the randomize option, so you always have a new noise seed every time you start this. And we can play around with the X and Y settings. For this I'm using 11 by 9, but it will depend on whatever size image you're using. And once that noise layer is there, we can turn it off. And we'll create another new layer. We'll fill this one in with black, and then we'll create a transparent layer right above it. And we're going to fill it in with a color. We're going to choose this hot pink. It is FF00F0, and what we're going to do is we're going to use the free select tool and just turn off that black solid for a minute, and we're just going to make a shape sort of like a half circle around where the effect should be located, just something like that, and then go and connect it back the other end, and then we can turn the black layer back on, and we'll fill this selection in on that transparent layer with that pink color, and then select none, and then we'll go to filters, blur, Gaussian blur, and we'll give this a blur of 20. Once that's finished running and it's blurred that layer, next what we can do is go to filters, map, displace, and in the displace options we want to choose that solid noise layer that we had before. This will give that line this really cool cloud-like texture to it. We're going to displace it by -20, just like that, and it will displace it to the left. And then the Y displacement, we want to displace it going up. So that's a negative number as well. So we'll do -20 for that also. Hit OK. And I'm just going to take this layer and duplicate it, take the bottom one and blur it. And we'll give this a Gaussian blur of about 50 or 60. And the last thing to do is to create a new transparent layer on top of the other layers. And we're going to right click on that first line layer and choose alpha to selection. And then we'll go back to that new layer, choose select invert, and then select grow. And this will grow the selection. So we'll probably do something between 5 and 10. Depending on how big your image is, that will change. And once that's done, we can go back to select invert, and then go to edit fill with foreground color or fill with white, and then select none, and then we can turn the other layers back on, and there we just added this white hot spot center to it, which we can create a new black layer right below it and merge those two together, and then set the blend mode on something like add or dodge just to brighten it up. And setting it on add kind of makes it much brighter in appearance, so we'll leave that alone. And we can play around with this a little bit more. We can displace that blurred glow layer a little bit. So we'll probably use the same settings, maybe boost them up a little bit. Hit OK. And that will just add some of the cloud-like texture back into the final result. That looks much better. Just like that. And we can duplicate that bottom layer again, make it brighter, and of course play around with blurring this one and displacing it and so on and so forth, and just make something really cool, and it will definitely enhance the final image. So I think that looks pretty good. We'll go ahead and merge these layers together onto that bottom black solid, and we can set the blend mode on screen. And the effect is a little hard to see, especially up here in the later areas. So what we'll do is we will duplicate the layer, select the bottom one, go to colors, color to alpha. In here we want to choose black as the alpha color and hit OK. And that will remove the black. And it looks kind of goofy. The glow doesn't affect the background like it should. So we'll go to filters, blur, Gaussian blur. Give this a blur of about 50, and then we can change the blend mode to something like hard light or grain merge, or something even like overlay, depending on how bright or dark your image is. It will change what blend mode to use. Hard light looks pretty good in this case if I turn the original back on. It's just something that helps get the glow back into darker areas, like around the water here. As you can see, it goes from looking like that to that. And we might even make the main effect layer. We might make that we might set the blend mode on add for that. In this case, it's a little too bright, so we'll just leave that alone for now. But that is almost all there is to it. Now, to get the distortion that I was talking about earlier behind this effect, that's why we have this secondary main image layer. So we'll take the image itself and we'll just right click and disable the layer mask so we can see what's going on. And we're going to displace it by the solid noise layer, just like we did with the main effect. And when we choose the displace filter, we can already see something going on. It's affecting it a little too much, especially down in here. It's creating some really goofy edges. So this is going to be a much lower amount than the other effects. Probably something around 10 is what we're looking for. So I think this looks pretty good. I'm leaving it at -9 and -9. And hit OK. And once that is completed, then we can right click and uncheck the disable layer mask feature. And now we want to turn the bottom layer back on so we can see what's going on. And making sure that we have the black layer mask selected, we're going to take the free select tool and turn on the main effect as well. We want to draw a path going from where the character's hand is around the main effect and back around to his fingers like that. And then we can go to Edit, Fill with Foreground Color, and then select None. Now you notice something goofy is going on right here. The edge doesn't blend, and so the image is getting really distorted and looks pretty goofy right through there. And the way to fix this is if we right click and choose Show Layer Mask, we can actually see it. And we can just go to Filters, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And we want a really small amount of blur on this, because otherwise these gray areas here, the image will only be semi-transparent through there. So you tend to have an overlapping effect where the original image and then the distorted image collide, and that looks really goofy having this overlay effect. So we don't want anything too extensive. So a small blur between like 5 and 10 should work pretty well. You may bump it up just a little bit more just to soften up the edges, but you really shouldn't have to go over anything over 20 unless you have a much larger image. That's the only exception to this, is if you're using a much larger image and you need a higher amount of Gaussian blur. So I'm going to set this at about 8, I think, maybe a little bit higher. That looks pretty good. Hit OK. Then right click on the layer, choose or uncheck the Show Layer Mask, and now you can see some of that going on. Now right in here you can see some of where that overlapping is going on that I mentioned. Which if it had a much higher blur, let me just quickly bring up the blur and increase that. There you can see a much higher overlap going on right through there. So we don't want that, so we can just make sure to keep that blur small. But the thing is, when you go and you add the effects on top of it, you tend to not notice it as much. One last thing that we can do is we'll create a new black layer and choose that pink purple color again, and choose a large brush. Set the blend mode of the black layer to screen. Choose a large brush and just place it in between the effect and the person's fingertips, like that. And then go to Filters, Gaussian Blur, and just give this a high blur. Something around 100 will work for this size image. And change the blend mode to normal. And we'll displace this layer by the Displace again, by that solid noise layer. And this will give this kind of cloud-like texture to it. And hit OK. Set the blend mode back on screen, or maybe we'll set that on add. It just depends on what your image looks like and what you're going for. But playing around with that will give you some really interesting results, and it will generally help hide some of that overlapping effect. That doesn't look so bad. And the last thing to do is, of course, color correct it. So there you have it, the final image once you've added a little color correction. That's about it for this tutorial. So I hope you found something about this tutorial useful. I hope it's helped you with any current projects or future projects that you may be working on. Be sure to check back next time for another exciting tutorial. I'm David Wood, DavidWoodFX.blogspot.com, and I will see you guys next time.